Now, I've been here 3 times already. First was to talk about Europe and the Middle East. Then I came back to talk about China, and this time we're going to talk about India. I was actually in India about 2 months ago. So right now I'm a junior in high school at Bennett Academy in Lisle. Now, I would like to talk to you today about India, like I said. But I don't just want to share with you facts about India. Today, my goal is to give you an idea of what it was like to be in India and to help you understand India. So hopefully, over the next hour, I will be able to do that and give you a new idea of this place that I really didn't understand, and hopefully I understand better now, but certainly not completely. So then, bear with me now. One of the things that one of the ideas that I thought helped me understand India the most is that in India, there's always more than one story. So now, let me tell you a story of India. Here we are now. We'll start off in Mumbai, in the south of India. This is the very famous Gateway of India. Now, this was where the British monarchs entered when they came to India on a trip, as India was formerly a British colony. This is also where the last of the British troops departed when India gained its independence in 1947. It's very significant. It's a very significant place, and also it's just very impressive from an architectural standpoint, and a very, attractive monument. Here we are now. This is in modern India. This is called the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminus. But in the olden days, it was simply called the Victoria Terminus for Queen Victoria. And that's kind of why it looks so Gothic and not quite so Indian. This is actually the central train hub of almost all of the city of Mumbai. And Mumbai is an enormous city. It's one of India's largest, and India is a pretty big place. So that's quite the honor. Now, more recently, it was actually the site of several terrorist attacks, which I'll touch on more later, but this was one of the targets, sadly, even though it's still quite the historical monument today. Also, if any of you have heard of the movie Slumdog Millionaire, they had a very famous dancing scene that was filmed in this train station. Now I'd like to show you, this is actually one of the homes of Mahatma Gandhi. He's obviously very, very famous throughout the world, and I think he completely deserves that after studying him for a while. Now, he stayed here with a friend while he was in Mumbai. He didn't actually live in Mumbai. But this was one of the places he stayed while he was campaigning for the independence of India. That was sort of his life's work, to get Indian freedom from what was then the British Empire. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about life in Mumbai. This is a covered market. Those sort of blue fluffy things are what equates to a roof, because it's just sort of an outdoor market, and you can go here to get basically anything that you wanted to buy ever. It was kind of cool to walk through here and to see, like, oh, well, this is where the people of Mumbai go to get their stuff. And this is kind of the same way it's been for, hundreds or even thousands of years. It feels, all of the cities throughout the world have their own markets like this, and so it's interesting to see.
What was the previous name of Mumbai?
Oh, Bombay. Mumbai and Bombay are actually the same city. Bombay's probably a little bit better known, but Bombay was the name of the city during the British days, and actually the Indians have renamed almost everything in India since the British days. And it causes a lot of confusion for, taxi drivers and the like. Now, this is something very interesting in India that's not quite totally a historical site, but it's just a side point about India. These men in the white hats you see all over Mumbai. They're riding trains or bikes or little cars, and sometimes little motorcycles in order to get around. Now, they're called dabawalas, and what they do is they deliver lunch. They'll pick up your lunch at your house, and then home cooked, and then they'll bring it to your office or wherever you work in the city in order to still kind of give a homey feel to working in the office. And this is kind of the Indian way, which is always blending the ancient and the modern together. This is me now, as you can see, in front of another very famous building, the Taj Hotel. It's owned by one of the richest, or was owned by one of the richest men in India. It's actually right across from the Gateway of India that I showed you earlier. Now, this place is notable because it was actually the main target of the terrorist attacks in 2008 that I mentioned before. So what happened was India and Pakistan have not really had good relations over the past 60 years. And so they're still very much unfriendly towards each other today. And one day in 2008, a boat unloaded in the Mumbai harbor with 6 men from Pakistan that were sent. And they just mingled in the local population, and then they actually attacked around a dozen or so sites around the city of Mumbai in a coordinated series of terrorist attacks. And this was their main target. And there was a large population of foreigners that lived here that they were targeting. But now the situation here was resolved, and it was quite tragic. But today, they've rebuilt all of the sites and sort of recovered, and security across the city is better, and they've really sort of moved on and moved forward since then. This is a little bit more of a personal story, because this is not a particularly famous place, but it's connected with the terrorist attacks. This was one of the places where the terrorists attacked, because they attacked hotels where there were large numbers of foreigners. And the reason this is of special importance to me is that this was actually the lobby of our hotel, the same hotel we stayed at, where they came to attack foreigners. And it was this was where people ate breakfast. So that was a little bit, kind of made it sort of more real just to me to be able to see that. Now, something else that Mumbai is very famous, or probably infamous for, is slums. They have slums all over the city, and they're kind of marked off by these blue tarps that are used on basically everything. They have a blue color, and that's from a blue plastic tarp that's used in place of a lot of other building materials. Now, slums get a pretty bad rap. I mean, they have a very horrible reputation for standard of living and those kinds of things. But I've read some things that actually say that the slums are beneficial for people in order to transition from the more rural life that India is used to kind of more urban and modern life. And this is something that's kind of a fun place to be able to see. This is inside a slum in the city, which I don't think a lot of people have sort of been there, but we figured we'd go. Our guide was willing to take us, and we wanted to see the real India. So this is actually where people would wash clothes. It's a giant laundry sort of area, and they wash the clothes they have water in these big pits, and they'll beat the clothes against the rocks. And astonishingly, all Indians seem to have at least a personal or someone who is their barber, who cleans their clothes, and there was one last one. But anyway, they're very well maintained. Almost all Indians have a very good haircut, and they have very clean clothes, so they're actually usually pretty dapper. And this is why. This is what goes on behind the scenes. This is actually a picture from the airport. As you can see, there's a runway out behind me. And you can see those blue roofs over there. That's the mark of a slum, typically. And that particular slum is called Dharavi. And it's actually the largest slum in the entire world by land area, just this particular pocket. And it's the slum that was featured in Slumdog Millionaire. That was where it was filmed, and that's where it was set in. actually. So it was very interesting to be able to see that in real life. Now, there's something else that you figure out pretty quickly about India, and that's that in India, there are animals everywhere. That's something that really distinguishes India. Like, for example, you can see on this brick wall behind me are monkeys. And there's just monkeys everywhere in India. They run all up and down the buildings and into people's houses. They steal things. They can actually open doors on occasion. They're pretty clever. Now, the Indians have sort of a love-hate thing going on with the monkeys. Because on the one hand, they're sort of affectionate towards the monkeys, and the Indians kind of have a live and let live attitude towards all of life. But at the same time, the monkeys cause a lot of trouble, so there's an ongoing battle. Here you can see a bunch of donkeys wandering down the street. Still a valid mode of transportation in India. This is one of my favorite pictures. Going one way are the cars, and the other way is the train of elephants. Here's a camel cart. That's one thing I wasn't expecting to see. And then there's cows. Cows are everywhere in India. They put it it's almost like someone just sprinkled cows over the whole of every Indian city and just dropped them randomly wherever they could find. So cows wander through the streets. They wander up and down alleyways and sidewalks. People feed them. Cows are actually considered holy in India for a reason that was explained to me, but I never fully understood. It has something to do with the Hindu pantheon. But cows are considered holy, and sort of all life is considered holy. They have a very good respect for life in India, so they just kind of live and let live. If the animals want to do what they want, they can do what they want. So then that does cause a little bit of confusion, though. For example, when you're driving down the street, as you can see, that's a rear view mirror up there, so this is on a road. And that causes a little bit of trouble. But all in all, they're pretty well liked in India. Here's me standing next to a cow that just kind of was minding its own business, didn't seem to mind me. And an Indian holy man next to me walking down the street. So I think this is a pretty good picture that's encompassing India. How many people can you fit into a four-wheeled vehicle? The world may never know. Now, this is sort of the best picture I could find of something that's really impossible to capture in a picture, which is just the chaos of India. Now, all of the streets are, I mean, just nuts. Driving in India is absolutely crazy. I mean, the animals are wandering back and forth. There's people, lights, sounds. I think the best way it was described to me is if you take a regular sort of residential street, like here in Lombard, and you were to make it half the size. And then after you made it half the size, you made all of the houses go in on each side and overlay on the actual street so that it was like a quarter of the size. And then after that, you put cars just up and down, not just pointing in two directions, but in every single direction that you could possibly think of. And then you put cows in the way of all of those. And then after that, finally, you put 500 motorcycles. Then you've got India. That was quite the adventure. Here we are now at a place, this is another historical site. This is a place called the Ajanta Ellora Caves. Now, here I am standing up at a viewpoint looking out over the Ajanta Caves, and they're actually carved into the side of the cliff here. I think this is interesting because if any of you were here during my China presentation, we talked about the Buddhist caves at a different place in Detong. And these are actually the same idea. These are Buddhist caves, or actually these particular ones are Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain, all three. But they're sort of carved in order for people to gain religious merit. So it's the same kind of principle, which I think is very interesting. Here we are inside one of the caves. I like looking at this particular cave because inside it's just it's really kind of awe-inspiring. Every one of these, every cave has something unique. They're all carved individually. And this one, I think, looks like a cathedral, kind of with all of the ribbed arches and the columns down the sides, the long aisles. I think it's very interesting and very impressive, sort of, to be there. This is actually the opposite. This is at the Ellora Caves, and this particular monument is called the Kailasanatha Temple. Now, instead of, most of the caves are carved into the cliff face, and this one is different because it was carved out. This whole temple is one solid piece of rock. This was once a mountainside, and they just carved it down layer by layer, adding all of that intricate detail. I think that's really amazing. It actually took them something along the lines of 200 years. But, I mean, that's considering that a king would build for like 10 years, and then he'd die, and then there'd be a war, and then a king would build for 10 years, and then he'd die, and then there'd be a war. So it wasn't totally, the 200-year fact isn't totally accurate. Here I am now, standing in the pouring rain. I don't particularly mind it, and most of the Indians don't, but some other people did. Certainly the tourists usually scatter whenever the rain comes. We actually decided to go to India during the monsoon season, which is not when tourists typically go. The high season is in November, December, but since I attend school full-time, I obviously can't do that. We had to go during the summer. So we had to choose between early summer, when it's the hot season in India, and when temperatures can actually reach like 110 degrees Fahrenheit on a pretty regular basis, or to go during the monsoon season, which is late summer. And we decided to go during the monsoon season. The odd thing, though, was that this year, I was there around 2 months ago, this year the monsoon came late. And because it came late, there actually was almost no rain while we were there. It was really weird. We had been expecting it to just be deluge and floods and biblical torrents. But it ended up being almost completely dry and usually pretty temperate. So it was very conducive to our tour in India to be able to, tour at all times, and we weren't really restricted by the weather. But I like this picture because I think it's very Indian to experience the monsoon.
You're in the rain up there.
Yep, I certainly am. I just like this picture because I think I look cool. I climbed over there. This is another of the caves at Ajanta and Ellora, but this one is a little more ruined, as you can tell by the giant gulf that's separating it. The Indians are usually pretty adventurous, and even the Indian tourists didn't go over there. So I was proud of myself for that one. Felt a little bit like Indiana Jones. Here I am at another very cool place. This is called the Daulatabad Fort. And now this is by Ajanta and Ellora, which are both by Mumbai. So this fort is actually, it's by far, I've seen a lot of forts in the world, because I mean, everyone needs forts. So this is by far the most impregnable fort that I have ever seen. It's crazy how much they thought about defense here. The forts of India are by far the equals of any of the castles of Europe. Here I am, having another one of my adventures. That's going to be a pretty consistent theme, me going and climbing on stuff. So here I went and climbed up this building with a bunch of the other more adventurous Indian tourists, because most people didn't quite make it that far. It was all the way on top of that fort on top of a mountain. And you could see everywhere. It was fantastic. But I really get a thrill out of being in those kind of ancient buildings like that and just, seeing it firsthand. Now we're going to a new place called Jaipur in Rajasthan. Now, Rajasthan means land of the kings. And it's called that because Rajasthan, throughout a lot of history, has been divided into tiny little feudal principalities that have each been ruled by their own Raja, or king. And then they've all been sort of warring with each other, and they're only one city wide. And this is the place called Jaipur, and this is actually the Amber Fort. which is one of the very famous monuments of Jaipur and of Rajasthan. And there you can see the large entrance ramp that leads up to it, and a few elephants, just as they would have been in the more ancient times. Here you can see what it looks like to ride an elephant. I really do enjoy this particular picture. This is what it looks like when you try to take a picture off the back of an elephant. Here we are now back to our map. So just to orient you, we talked about Mumbai. Mumbai is down here on the coast of India. Then we talked about Aurangabad. The city called Aurangabad is where the Ajanta-Ellora caves are and where the Daulatabad fort is. It's more in central India. Then we'll go up here. We just talked briefly about Jaipur. Then Delhi is the capital of India. Agra is another very famous imperial site. This is Khajuraho, which is a very famous site associated with Hinduism and temples. And then over here, Varanasi, which is the holiest spot in India. Now, I bet you all recognize this picture. All right, can anyone tell me what this is? Ah, wrong. This is, oh, yeah, I took this picture just for that particular reason, and it's set up this way for a reason. This is actually the Bibi Ka Maqbara. It's affectionately known as the Little Taj because it was actually built afterwards in the style of the Taj Mahal, in imitation. But it's far smaller, and the proportions are off. You can see the central building is more narrow, and the minarets are wider than they should be. But it really is a pretty good replica, and I like to play that trick on people. This is just me trying to look cool again. Doesn't quite work as well with the suit. This is the Taj Mahal. Here we are now in Agra. Agra was the imperial capital for the Mughal dynasty, and they're the ones who built this very legendary monument. We're looking out across from it from what is called the Moon Garden. And the Moon Garden was where the Mughal emperor would sit and be able to admire his creation from across the Yamuna River. It really is a very good view, and this was my introduction to the Taj Mahal. Here I am now standing on a rooftop in Agra. You can see out there in the distance, it's very small, but you can make out the Taj Mahal. It's visible from almost everywhere in the city. It's really interesting at night because the city is completely black, and you can just, for a while, you can see the Taj Mahal on top of it, but when the sun sets, it's completely black, and you can't see a thing. But from up here, you can see all of the city of Agra spanned out. And here I actually have a bindi on my forehead. That's it's a traditional Hindu thing that is associated with Hinduism very much, and it was given to me as a sort of welcome as I was a visitor. I think this is just a fantastic picture. Here you can see me in front of the Taj Mahal, and it's reflected in the pool down here. This is one of the most visited tourist sites in the entire world, and obviously it's very famous. You see it on sort of collections of all of the most famous buildings in the world. I really do think this is a pretty amazing building, and it's very, photogenic, so it helps when you're trying to take pictures. I don't know how many pictures we took here, but if I showed you all of them, then you'd be here all day. Here's another picture now down the central channel that most people recognize the Taj Mahal from. I'm also wearing the hat, as you may see. I don't know if you can read it, but it actually says Bennett Academy across the top of the hat. I figured I'd show some school spirit in front of the Taj Mahal. Here's a closer up view. I like getting sort of different perspectives from all over. It really is amazing. Now, the Taj Mahal, I haven't explained what it was until now, but many people aren't totally sure I mean, I honestly wasn't totally sure before I started doing all of my research. But the Taj Mahal, it was built as a tomb during the Mughal dynasty. So that's what it is. It's a tomb for a person called Mumtaz Mahal. Now, Mumtaz Mahal, that's where the Mahal comes from, was the wife of Emperor Shah Jahan, who was one of the most powerful emperors of the Mughal dynasty, which was one of the most powerful empires of India. Now, Shah Jahan was one of the last of the Mughal emperors because of the extravagance of building this particular building and the rest of his court. His forebears were a little more conservative and interested in building and preserving the empire, but Shah Jahan was extravagant, and he essentially spent the empire into destruction, and it fell shortly afterwards. He had a son called Aurangzeb, who was the last Mughal emperor, and after that, the Mughal empire sort of collapsed into oblivion, and that's when the British stepped in and took over India. I really like this picture. This one really just gives you a perspective of how big the Taj Mahal is. That is me. So if that doesn't give you an idea, it's pretty big up close. I like this picture. I think it's rather aesthetically appealing with sort of darker red hues. This is the Agra Fort, and it was actually built, or at least started during the reign of Emperor Akbar, who was one of the greatest emperors of India and also from the Mughal dynasty. He was the grandfather of Shah Jahan. Now, at the end of his life, Shah Jahan was actually overthrown by his sons because some people say because Shah Jahan was too extravagant with the finances of the empire, and in order to save the empire, they needed to take over. But I've also heard that it was sort of because he was beginning to lose his mind and he wasn't running things properly. But anyway, his sons rebelled, and a son called Aurangzeb finally took over, and he imprisoned Shah Jahan here in this Agra fort, where from his room, which I'm standing in, he could forever look down upon his creation, the Taj Mahal. Now, there are a lot of people in India. I mean, like 1.2 billion people. But there are plenty of them that were around. And wherever we went, I think it's particularly interesting because everywhere in the world, the tourists take picture of the locals. But there's not that many places in the world where the locals take pictures right back at the tourists. Now, that happened constantly in India. I was stopped at every place we went to take pictures. I mean, I'm young, blonde, and tall by Indian standards, so I was quite the oddity, just like in China. So everywhere we went, there were people who stopped us to take pictures. So I started a practice of everyone who took a picture with me, I would take a picture with them as well. By the end of the trip, I had 36 pictures. So as you can see, this happened quite a lot, and I just want to show you some of my favorites. There you can see, this is the Daulatabad Fort, and that's the building I was running around in. Apparently, orange hair is very popular in India. I don't know why. Can't explain it. This is in front of some caves. And this is during the monsoon. You can kind of see it's raining at the Kailasanatha temple. I don't remember where this is, but these guys were kind of cool. Here's some more. All right, then. So another thing India's pretty famous for is its trains, or maybe infamous is the better word. Indian trains are sort of very famous because there's just so many people and not close to enough infrastructure. So the trains kind of just get there when they get there on Indian time. That's one of the sort of charms and problems with India is that everything happens on Indian time, which means that as long as it happens, it's okay. So the trains, if you have a 3 o'clock train, it could get there at 7 or 8 or not get there at all. It could take you to a different place. Who knows? It's all the adventure. There's a joke that goes along the lines of one day there was a man who was, he laid down on the tracks and he was waiting to get run over by a train. And all of the people around there, all of the passerby would ask him what he had with him. And he had a lunchbox. So they would ask, well, if you're just waiting to get run over, why do you have the lunchbox? And he says, you can starve to death waiting for a train in India. Here we are now at the temples of Khajuraho. That's another place I showed you on the map. And I think the temples here are really just beautiful. You can see 2 of them back here. They're all built in this individual style of sort of sweeping up to this grand spire. And it's built, it has an Indian mythological theme, but I probably don't need to go into that. It's very beautiful to see. And almost all temples in India are built along this same style. But most of them are ruined today. What makes Khajuraho great is that they have a whole giant group of temples here. Probably it's around a dozen of them that are totally well preserved and still look much as they did in the ancient times. This is a close-up of one of the temples from the side. They're all on this giant stone platform, and you can climb up there, which I did. And then you can go up the stairs and go inside, and there's a big central chamber under the spire, and that's the most holy place. So on the topic of Hinduism, I should probably talk about something that's very often misunderstood, which is this particular symbol, the swastika. Now, the swastika was originally from India. It was an Indian religious symbol. It started with Hinduism, and it represented it's like, in Hinduism it has many different connotations, but the one that I had heard the most was that it's like a wheel, because life is sort of circular in the Eastern religions. You die and then you're reborn, as opposed to just dying and having an eternal fate immediately. But they've had this symbol, and it was adapted into Buddhism, and it was adapted into Jainism. So you'll see many of the statues, the religious statues, will have this symbol on their foreheads, or it'll be on people's doorsteps. It's very common throughout the sort of Asian region. And it was stolen, sort of hijacked by Hitler for sort of personal reasons. He just liked the symbol. There was no particular... He had no connection to the original spiritual philosophies. His was quite the opposite. But since then, the symbol has a kind of bad rap. But originally, it was actually meant to portray something very sort of deep and spiritual. Here's something that I thought we were lucky to be able to see. This is a religious festival in India. Or it's actually just a regular day of the week. They have... One day of the week is devoted to a certain god or goddess in the Hindu pantheon. So it's very good. If you want to understand India, you need to understand Hinduism. India is a Hindu majority country, and although there are many Muslims, Buddhists, and a few Christians that live there, it's still essentially a Hindu country. What I thought is one of the most interesting things about Hinduism is that my apologies. It's actually, Hinduism is not a religion. Hinduism is a broad generalization. It was actually originally put on by the British just to kind of designate all of the religions of India. But there are 2 main sects of Hinduism. That one is called Shaivites and one is called Vaishnavites. And they're worshippers of Shiva and Vishnu, respectively. And they have a totally different pantheon of gods and mythology. And they're actually distinct enough that they could be considered 2 separate religions. So Hinduism is just a Western term. But in India, all of the religions kind of have gray area. And it's very easy to go within or between them. Thank you. So thus, it's kind of just one giant spiritual philosophy of India where you can believe what you want and kind of call yourself what you want, but it's pretty tolerant. At the same time, though, there's a ton of religious strife between all of the different denominations, the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs, especially, which is very tragic, and that's led to a lot of violence even in the modern days. Here we are now, back to our map. I like to check in back with the map once in a while just so that we know where we're going. So now we've been to all of these places, and we're going to talk about Varanasi and Delhi. Varanasi is sort of the Hindu spiritual center of India, and it's also, this is where a lot of the spiritual philosophies originated, which I'll talk more about. And then Delhi is, of course, the capital of the modern nation of India. Now, we'll start our journey towards Varanasi with these men who are also journeying towards Varanasi. But the difference is that they are journeying on foot, completely from wherever they live in India, their homelands, to this holy city. We will, fortunately, take the shortcut of just being able to look at a few pictures without having to get out of your chairs. But these guys took the hard way. So they're pilgrims. They come from all over India, and they wear this orange clothing, which is supposed to designate holiness. And they'll walk barefoot all the way to Varanasi carrying these sticks with little miniature buckets on the end of them. And they'll take water from the Ganges River, which is considered holy, and they'll bring it back to wherever they are to use it for religious services. This is going on all over India. So driving by on all the Indian roads, in addition to the cows and pedestrians and et cetera, you'll see these pilgrims. And it's very impressive. I appreciate the philosophy, and I think it's very impressive that they're willing to put themselves through this kind of sort of arduous struggle in order to attain holiness. Here we are now in the middle of the city of Varanasi. And with the press of people, you might think something is going on, but this is actually just a regular night in Varanasi. I'm out on the street in the city, and it's just, it's crazy. There's just lights and sounds and smells and everything everywhere. It's just the cacophony of sound and all of the vibrant colors everywhere. Some people who've come back from India have described India as an assault on the senses, and I don't think that's completely inaccurate, especially in Varanasi. Here I am now, out at night. The flower thing isn't just a stylistic statement on my part. It's actually, apparently, the Hawaiians and the Indians share something in common, and even though it looks like a flower garland thing, it's considered an Indian welcome, too, apparently, although I think they probably stole it from the Hawaiians. So that was given to me on the first night, and so I wore it around a bit. But here I am out at night in the city of Varanasi, and at night everything is still completely bustling, all hours of the night. India sort of never sleeps, kind of like many modern cities, and it's nuts. And people will just whoosh by you, little motorcycles will cross, and cars could skim you, and people won't even blink an eye. It's total chaos, and it takes a lot of getting used to. I was pretty scared at first, but once I did get used to it, I really did sort of get a feeling for the real India. Here we are now, the next morning. This is a little bit of a quieter time. We're out, this is actually the River Ganges here, and all of these people, you can see all of the orange shirts, they're all the pilgrims. So they're coming down to the river in the morning to bathe in the river Ganges, which is considered very holy. Lots of Hindu scriptures say that bathing in the Ganges is one of the best ways to sort of attain holiness. And so many people do it, even to the point of doing it every day. Many of these people are pilgrims, but it's very interesting to see this ritual. And a lot of people come here to Varanasi, including the Beatles, to be able to appreciate this spirituality, because this is a spiritual city, and everything around there centers on the religious life and the philosophical life, and that can't really be extricated from the life of the people here. Here you can see a view down the side of the river. All of these little steps leading down are called ghats. G-H-A-T-S, ghats. So one ghat is where the people come down to the river in order to bathe, and they're ranked in order of holiness. So the most holy one was the one that I just showed you, and then they run all down the river for all of the people that want to bathe in the river Ganges. Here you can see me floating a candle down the river Ganges. That's an old tradition in India, and it's considered to grant you a wish. I don't know if that's completely accurate, but I believe that believing in traditions works, so we'll see. And this is, back here, we're going down the river Ganges now. This is still along the banks of Varanasi. And this is one of the things that you'll see. This is actually a cremation ghat. So the Indians here are burned, immolated, after their death, and then they are collected up and dispersed into the river Ganges, their ashes. And now it's kind of a touching thing. Indians are all cremated because they view life in a, like I said, in a circular way, instead of just people who are buried kind of view it as that was their one life. And Hindus think they've lived 1,000 times before and they'll live 1,000 times again at varying stages of life. And as such, there's no point in keeping bodies around, so they cremate people, and it's considered the most holy to be able to be immersed here in the river Ganges. Here we are now in a dark alleyway in Varanasi. Varanasi was the most Indian-feeling city that I've been to in all of India. It was extremely crazy and sort of old and hectic, and everything was kind of slopped together. I enjoyed the eclectic feel, and it was very sort of old-timey. It felt like a real old town. Like the closest I've ever been to Varanasi was probably the old city of Jerusalem. Now, this is a very narrow alleyway that you can see. The people are walking back and forth. Indian holy men will walk back and forth, called ascetics. And then different spiritual people mixed with businessmen and some modern people. There's stalls on the side here that'll sell various commodities if you want to go here. It's a very interesting place and a very vibrant atmosphere. Now, after we've talked about Hinduism, I should touch on all of the religions, or another religion of India, because India is an extremely religious place, and Indian religion is a core part of India. Now, one of the other major religions that originated here is Buddhism. You may have heard of Buddhism. It was founded by Buddha as actually almost a rebellion movement against Hinduism, and how corrupt Hinduism had become, and how corrupt the caste system was, and with the priests at the top. And it was very hierarchical and had kind of gotten away from just pure religion. I thought it was odd. There's a parallel between the story of Buddha rebelling against the hierarchy of Hinduism and the story of Jesus Christ rebelling against the hierarchy of Judaism, which had sort of gotten more monetized and gotten away from the original message. So that's the same thing Buddha did around 400 years before Christ. And he lived his whole life around this little area just east of Varanasi. And he actually came to a place outside Varanasi, where I am now, called Sarnath. And that was where he preached his first sermon after he had attained enlightenment. It was supposedly on this site. Now here you can see me spinning the prayer wheels, because I really like prayer wheels wherever I find them in the world. I had seen a lot in Tibet, and I saw a lot in Bhutan. It's sort of, the idea is that you spin, and there's prayers written on the side, and you spin your prayers into the wind. So I take the opportunity to spin prayer wheels wherever I go. I think it's a nice symbol. Here you can see what supposedly marks the actual site of the first sermon at Sarnath. Obviously, that can't be determined with very much accuracy, but tradition holds that Buddha stood here and preached to his first 5 disciples about how he had attained enlightenment. Now, Buddhism, the core principles are, they have something called the Four Noble Truths. The first one is that life is suffering. The second one is that suffering is due to attachment to worldly goods, attachment to things that you want to happen, and then you suffer when things that you want to happen don't happen, or when your reality does not conform to what you want it to be. The third one is that you can escape suffering, and that you can actually live a life completely without suffering if you cut all attachment. And then the fourth one lays out the exact path to how you can do that. It's a very, very simple philosophy. Buddhism is very simple and direct, but it's very powerful. I've gotten into a lot of reading about Buddha and Buddha's teachings, and I think it really is very interesting. But supposedly this was the site, and they have a tree planted here to represent the Bodhi tree, which the Buddha sat under when he attained enlightenment. This is the Great Stupa at Sarnath. Now, this particular stupa was built also to commemorate this first sermon. Now, actually, it was built by the great emperor Ashoka, and actually, I'm sorry, there's one nearby that's been destroyed that was built by Ashoka. This was built by another Mauryan emperor shortly after Buddha's death. And these stupas are built all over India and sort of all over Asia to commemorate Buddha, and they were originally held relics of his body. Then, India was divided between Buddhism and Hinduism for a while, even though Buddhism has long since sort of declined, and now it's really a tiny minority of the population. But in around 1400 and 1500, Islam came to India. This is the marker of the first coming of Islam. It's called the Qutb Minar, and it's the the minaret of the first mosque that was built in India by the Muslim conquerors. It really is enormous. Unfortunately, you can't climb it. I wish you could, but several people fell to their death from the top, so it's no longer allowed that you can climb it. It's rather unstable nowadays. But this was built as a commemoration of the power and might of Islam. They originally came in, and the Muslim invaders wanted to conquer India and convert the population to Islam. They were still sort of spreading out from the original message of the Prophet, and they had been spreading the religion all over across North Africa and the Middle East, and they'd come now into India. This is another marker of Muslim power in India. This is called the Bulund Darwaza. It's actually the largest gate in Asia still today. And it was built later by the great Mughal Emperor Akbar to commemorate this. And it's the gate to a large outdoor mosque in a city that was built by Akbar expressly for this purpose. Here I am now inside, this is the tomb of a Sufi saint. It's called a Sufi shrine, and Sufis are Muslim holy men in India. And they were mystics, so they would wander around and kind of give people revelations that they had had of God or of understanding the religion, and they would preach. And they actually helped a lot to sort of bridge the divide between the Hindus and the Muslims. Eventually, the Muslims kind of figured out that they could not possibly convert India, how big it was and with the rich diversity of the religious tradition they had there. So these Sufis kind of started to bridge the divide and to find what they had in common. Here I am now in front of a place called, excuse me, Fatehpur Sikri. Now, Fatehpur Sikri was built by the same Mughal Emperor Akbar. And what I think is important, Akbar and Ashoka are my two favorite Indian emperors. And Akbar I think is very important because Akbar was the first emperor to really unite all of India. And many had united all of India militarily. But Akbar wanted to bridge the divide. There had been religious conflict for many years. The Muslims and the Hindus had been fighting against each other for many years, and they had been fighting other religions that were in the area, and it was the scene of very much conflict. But when Akbar became emperor, he proclaimed that no single religion could claim absolute truth. There was something to be learned from all of the different religions, and at the core, all of the religions really preached the same message. So as such, he declared that the emperor of India should be completely unaffiliated with any one of the major religions. And so he had established equality for all the religions and peace and harmony. So during his rule, there were many people who worked for unity between the Hindus and the Muslims and to find common ground between the two major religions. Now, sadly, this effort kind of broke down after his death, but it was sort of a noble attempt to unite people under common values. This is another one of the very impressive buildings at Fatehpur Sikri. This whole city was laid out as Akbar's city to plan his new model empire, which one of the columns of was religious tolerance. And then he established this city as his capital and established his philosophy from here. He would summon scholars from all of the major religions of the world, including Christians from Europe, to come to his city here and attend religious debates where the absolute claims of religion were laid aside and all of the different religious people would discuss what their differences were, what their issues were, and what they had in common. It's probably the last time such a thing has happened in history where all of the leaders of the religions have sat down together, and I think it's very unique that it happened here. This is back in the city of Delhi. This is called the Red Fort. And now I want to introduce you to my last theme, which is going to be the independence of India. India, like I said, for many years was a British colony, for several hundred years actually. And it was ruled by England, a foreign power. So they struggled for many years to get independence, and Gandhi was the leader of that struggle. They would protest and do basically everything they could, short of open rebellion. Gandhi always preached against violence, so they used nonviolent means in order to overthrow the British. And when the British finally did leave, independence was proclaimed right from this balcony up here by Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of United India. You can see the Indian flag flying in the background, which is one of the reasons I like this picture. Here you can see sort of the Indian disregard for danger, which is pretty common characteristic of its citizens. These three men here are running across the top of a wall that if they'd fallen, they would have had quite a way down. On the whole topic of disregarding safety, here you can see this is one of the lines leading up to the fort, and here's a soldier who's just, casually pointing his rifle at the crowd. Now I want to talk a little bit more about Gandhi personally, because I think he was a completely great man in every respect. He really is impressive in how principled he was and how much he held to his principles under any circumstance. This was actually his personal home near the end of his life. So Gandhi struggled and led India throughout much of his life for 20 years towards independence. He first fought for Indian rights in South Africa and then moved to India and continued campaigning there. But when India finally attained independence, there was a great tragedy because India and Pakistan were formed afterwards, because after the British were gone, there was no one to mediate the disputes between the Hindus and the Muslims, and it devolved into really brutal sectarian violence between both of them. And Gandhi had always preached against this. He had preached the unity of all of the Indians under one banner and kind of a more secular view of things. So towards the end of his life, he was campaigning against the violence that had occurred between these religions and between India and Pakistan. And while he did that, he lived in this house in Delhi while violence was going on outside. And he fasted until the religions would stop fighting with each other. Now, this is very important for another reason, because this was the place of Gandhi's death. This is actually, the house that he lived in is back here, and he walked, this is a very powerful memorial here. He walked along, these were his steps, this is the path he followed. And he was actually assassinated by a Hindu extremist who thought that he was being too kind in preaching peace towards all the different religions, and thought that he should support the Hindus and not really the Muslims, as he was a Hindu himself. So this was the path that he took out of his house, and those were his, this is where he walked, and it was really powerful to be there where he actually walked along his path, and to be able to stand there and see that. The path leads all the way around and up to here, where this marker marks the spot where the assassin shot Mahatma Gandhi and killed him in 1949. Now, it's a very powerful memorial. I think it's one of the greatest places I've been on all of Earth in terms of memorializing great people. And this is actually, you can see that I'm barefoot here, because this is actually considered holy ground. Now, I would have to be barefoot if I had gone into any of the temples, so here I'm barefoot at the site of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. It's a very powerful scene, and it's a very great man that's commemorated. This was the place where Mahatma Gandhi was cremated. It's called Rajghat. And this is sort of where all the foreign dignitaries and heads of state come. John Kerry was actually in India at about the same time, in Mumbai, but many of the heads of all the different countries have come to this place to pay their respects. This is a place called the Bangla Sahib Gurudwara. It is a center for the Sikh religion, which is one of the ones that I haven't really mentioned, and I won't go too deep into it. But I thought this was particularly interesting because we went in here, and we were taken by our guide, who was a Hindu, and he took us into this Sikh temple, and not really knowing what to expect. And we went inside, and there was actually a religious service going on. So there were tons of Sikhs around, and they were all worshiping. And so I'm wearing the covering on my head to be respectful. And it was very kind of actually pretty terrifying, because I thought that I'd screw something up and offend someone, and then, that something unfortunate would happen to us. But it was very cool to be able to go in there and see that. And it was actually like, this is what real Indians do. This is certainly not a tourist attraction. So I thought that was a very unique experience that I was able to have in India. The obligatory McDonald's. I still haven't been able to get away from one in any country I've been to yet. This picture I think is funny. This is the little SWAT bus that was just driving around through a little public park. There didn't appear to be any neat reason for it. They just someone took out the SWAT car for a joyride. Now today, India there's a lot of promise for the future, but there's also a lot of apprehension. India, for many years since independence, they have established their own government, and they count themselves as the world's largest democracy, which they are. But they have a lot of problems. The leaders there are very corrupt, and the politicians have been very corrupt and kind of self-interested for many years, not really interested in the benefit of the country as a whole. But there's a new minister in charge, prime minister, called Narendra Modi, and he was actually in New York, I believe, last week. And he is supposedly the guy that's going to change India. There's a lot of hope for him to be able to come in and reform things, get rid of some of the corruption, and put India on a new track, although he's certainly not without controversy himself. These people here, though, we saw were protesting something. They were protesting, I believe, land seizures of their farmland, and they were marching here on the Capitol. This is in Delhi. This is a place called the Jami Masjid, and this is my probably final place that I want to show you. It's a giant open-air mosque, which means that that building, even though that's the mosque, it's actually all out here. So the whole courtyard is where all of the worshipers stand. And this is one of the symbols of Delhi, and Delhi is in turn the symbol of India. There's a minaret up there where you can go and get a very good view of the city. Here I am now standing up in that minaret, looking out over the city of Delhi. Unfortunately, you can't really see it. You can just see me kind of butting shoulders with a bunch of Indian guys, but it's a fantastic view. It really is unbelievable. And it was really cool to stand from here and sort of watch the sun move towards the horizon on our last day in India. And then, finally, we came here. This is a place called the Shrine of Nizamuddin, and this is where we finished our trip, and this is where I'm going to finish talking to you guys today. It's a Sufi shrine, like I talked about, and the Sufis were those people who tried to bridge the divide between the different religions, and they sort of tried to preach that everyone is going towards the same goals, so there shouldn't be any disputes about it between the religions, which has been an issue in India for all of time. And we came here, and it's an exclusively Muslim neighborhood, and the police don't really extend their control everywhere in India. There's a lot of places where there's sort of people can do what they want. There's not authority there. So here is kind of one of them. And going in here, I wanted to go in here to see the historical site, but it actually quickly turned out to be very dangerous. I mean, it's not totally out of the question that someone could be killed here. I mean, including us. As we were quite, the odd ones out as tourists who were trying to come here into this very religious, very Muslim neighborhood. But we came here and we pressed on. I was pretty scared while we were in there, and my father, who was with me, was also. And it was not at all sort of pleasant. But we went there anyway, and we went to pay our respects at the site of this very famous man who tried to create unity in India. But we were able to come here, and the people allowed us in, and we were able to pay our respects just as the Indians did. And I thought that was very powerful, and then we just left, and that was one of the defining experiences of India. So I think it kind of shows that it's, of course, always good to take precautions, but at the same time, there shouldn't be much of the things in the world that people are afraid of are not worth being afraid of. So, at the same time, it was an experience for me in being able to broaden my own horizons and understand something new and understand that the people here are the same as, us. And they have the same values, and so I was doing something respectful there. And so I thought that was a very defining experience in my travel career. So with that, I'd like to thank you all once again for coming. I hope you enjoyed the program and have experienced a little bit more about India. Thank you.